Hello, chemistry students. Today we're going to be performing our measurements laboratory. So in this laboratory, we're going to be using instruments to learn how to make metric measurements. So specifically, I'm going to be working with you through parts 2 and 3 of this experiment. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the quarter that we're going to be using for part 2 of this experiment. We'll be determining its mass. This quarter is a 2016 quarter. Okay, so we're first going to use a top-loading balance to determine the mass of our quarter. So this is a top-loading balance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of weight paper and set it on the balance. You can see our weight paper has mass, and I'm going to go ahead and tear that so that now the mass of that weight paper has been subtracted and we're back at 0. Now we're going to mass our quarter. So our quarter has a mass of 5.77 grams on the top loading balance. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use an analytical balance to determine the mass of the same quarter. So first I'm going to show you our analytical balance. So this is our analytical balance. And we'll now be using our analytical balance to determine the mass of the same quarter. So our analytical balance is at 0. We're going to take a piece of weight paper, set it on our analytical balance, and tear it so that now we subtract our weight paper and the balance is still at 0. We'll now add our quarter to the balance. So we've added our quarter, and on the analytical balance, the mass of our quarter is 5.7726 grams. Okay, so for part 3 of this experiment, we're first going to start by filling our measuring cup with 2 ounces of deionized water. Our ounces are over here. And then we're going to transfer the 2 ounces of water into a 100 ml graduated cylinder and record the volume of that 2 ounces of water in milliliters. So we'll take our water, so you can see we have our 2 ounces, and now we're going to transfer that to our 100 ml graduated cylinder. And we'll record our volume in milliliters. We'll zoom in here. And this is our volume of the 2 ounces of water in milliliters. Okay, so for part B of number 3 of this experiment, we are going to determine how many milliliters of water this test tube will hold. So we're first going to fill our test tube with deionized water. And we're going to transfer the water in our test tube to our 10 mil graduated cylinder. And now we'll zoom in. That is how many milliliters of water was in our test tube. So after transferring the water and determining the amount of volume that fits in our test tube, we also need to determine the length of that test tube that we used. So this is the length of that test tube. Okay, so for part C of number 3 of our measurements lab, we're going to be adding 2 milliliters at a time up to a total volume of 6 milliliters to our test tube. And we're going to be looking at what length that takes of our test tube. So we're going to get 2 milliliters. This is our first 2 milliliters. So that's our first 2 milliliters of water added to our test tube. And then we're going to do our second 2 milliliters. So now we have a total of 4 milliliters of water. Get that bubble out of there. And now we're going to add our last 2 milliliters of water. Here's our last 2 milliliters of water. And there's the volume on our last 2 milliliters of water and the length of the test tube that we used. So you will now need to use the measurements that we made to complete this experiment. That concludes our measurement experiment for the day. Thank you for joining me.